The house stood just as it had years ago, nestled between towering pines and framed by the long-forgotten fence. A gust of wind rustled through the trees as Sarah stopped at the gate, her hand hesitant on the latch. The weight of time and unsaid words seemed to cling to the very air. She hadn't been back in years, not since that last argument, not since she had left and sworn never to return. But the call came, and now, here she was, home again. She opened the gate slowly, its creak breaking the silence, and stepped onto the gravel path that crunched beneath her shoes. The front door was ajar, the voices from within a mixture of low murmurs. She could hear her brothers inside, their voices tinged with a tension that matched her own heartbeat. Her fingers hovered over the doorbell, but then, she simply pushed the door open. Inside, the smell of home hit her. Something familiar, something once comforting. The others were gathered around the kitchen table, their faces drawn and eyes heavy with the same weight she carried. Peter, the eldest, stood first, his brow furrowing when he saw her. "You're here," he said, more statement than greeting. Sarah's lips twitched into a half smile. "I wasn't sure if I should come." "Well, you're here now," Peter muttered, his voice tight, but he gestured to the empty chair beside him. The room felt smaller than she remembered, suffocating almost. Luke sat with his arms crossed, leaning back in his chair as if he could disappear into it. He hadn't looked at her since she walked in. His silence was louder than words, his resentment a tangible thing. Their mother, frail and pale, lay in the adjoining room. The quiet beeps of machines and the gentle rise and fall of her chest were the only indications that life remained. Sarah's eyes flickered toward the hallway, her heart heavy with memories of laughter and warmth, before everything had unraveled. "How long has she?" Sarah didn't finish the question. "A few days," Peter replied, his voice softer this time. "She's been asking for you." Sarah swallowed hard. Her mother had always been the one to bridge the gaps, to hold the family together. Now, in her final days, it was her absence from the kitchen that made the rift between them all the more glaring. Luke shifted, his chair scraping against the floor as he stood abruptly. "I'll be outside," he muttered, the words thick in his throat, and with that, he was gone. The screen door slammed behind him, the echo reverberating through the house. Peter sighed, rubbing his temples. "He's been like that since we got the news. Can't let go of the past." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "Neither can I." The truth was heavy between them. Years of unspoken anger and hurt built on misunderstandings, slights, and a shared silence that had only widened the gap between them. They had grown apart not because of one big thing, but because of 100 small ones. And now, it all seemed so pointless. Peter's eyes softened, though his shoulders still carried the weight of responsibility. "It's not too late," he said quietly, glancing toward the window where Luke paced outside, his head down. Sarah hesitated, but then nodded. Without a word, she stepped outside, the air cooler against her skin, the sun dipping lower in the sky. Luke didn't turn when she approached, but his tense posture said enough. She stopped a few feet away, crossing her arms, unsure where to begin. "You know, I didn't want to come either," she said softly, looking up at the sky instead of him. "But I couldn't stay away, not this time." Luke's jaw clenched, but he still didn't look at her. "Why now?" His voice was barely a whisper, but the accusation was clear. "After all these years, why now?" "Because," Sarah's voice broke, and she cleared her throat. "Because I realized holding on to all of it wasn't helping anyone, least of all me. I don't want to keep being angry, Luke. Not anymore." Silence hung between them like the fading daylight. Sarah held her breath, waiting, hoping. Finally Luke turned, his eyes searching hers, raw and unguarded for the first time in years. "I don't know if I can let it go," he admitted, the words cracking as they escaped his lips. "You don't have to right away," Sarah replied, "but maybe we can try, for her." They stood there in stillness side by side, the weight of years lifting slightly with the acknowledgement of pain and the willingness to release it, little by little. Inside the beeping continued, steady and unyielding, a reminder that time moves on whether we're ready or not. And as the sun set over the house, the first stars appearing in the sky, something shifted. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was the first step. The long road home wasn't about the house or even their mother. It was about letting go of the past so they could find a way forward, together. Sarah stood beside Luke, the quiet of the evening pressing in around them. The words had hung between them for years, unspoken but heavy. She could feel the weight of his resentment, his bitterness, and knew all too well how it had grown over time, feeding on every slight, every unhealed wound. "I know it's not easy," she said, her voice softer now, as though the enormity of the moment demanded gentleness. "I held onto it for years too. The anger, it feels like it's protecting you, doesn't it? Like if you let it go, you'll be vulnerable." Luke's eyes flicked toward her, a flash of pain in them. "It's not just anger, Sarah, it's everything. You left, and it all fell on me. I took care of everything while you—" He broke off, his voice tight with unshed emotion. Sarah swallowed, letting his words settle. She had expected this, but hearing it aloud stung all the same. She hadn't understood back then the burden her absence would place on him. But now, standing here, she felt the weight of that guilt. "I was selfish," she admitted, her own voice cracking under the strain of the confession. "I left because I couldn't handle it. I thought it was easier to walk away than to face everything, face you." She paused, breathing in the cool evening air. "And I was wrong. I was so wrong." Luke said nothing, but his posture shifted, his shoulders relaxing ever so slightly. The silence stretched between them, thick with everything that had been left unsaid for so long. "I missed you," she continued, her voice trembling now. "Every day I missed you, and I missed this place. But I told myself I didn't need it, that I could move on without you, but I couldn't. I've carried it all with me, just like you have. The anger, the hurt, it follows you everywhere, doesn't it?" Luke's gaze was fixed on the horizon where the last of the sunlight had dipped below the trees, casting the sky in hues of deep blue and purple. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Sarah feared he would shut her out once again, the same way he had for years, but then, his voice came, low and broken. "I thought if I stayed angry I wouldn't have to feel it all, the pain of it, of you leaving, of losing, everything." Sarah's breath hitched, tears welling in her eyes. "I know," she whispered, "I know. But we've lost so much already, we can't lose each other too." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees, and for a moment, it was as if the earth itself was urging them forward, begging them to release the past. Luke shifted, his arms falling to his sides no longer crossed in defense, his shoulders sagged, as if the weight of years had finally become too much to carry. "I don't know how to let it go," he admitted, his voice barely audible. Sarah stepped closer, her hand reaching out tentatively, resting on his arm. "You don't have to do it all at once," she said, her tone soft but steady. "Letting go, it's not something that happens overnight. It's something you choose every day. And I'm here now. We can do it together." For the first time since she had arrived, Luke turned to face her fully, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. His jaw was clenched, but there was something else there too, a flicker of hope, a small glimmer of the boy she once knew, buried beneath years of resentment and hurt. Together, they stood in the fading light, the quiet of the evening wrapping around them like a balm. It wasn't a resolution, not yet, but it was a beginning. The first step on a long road toward healing, toward forgiveness, toward letting go of the past that had held them both captive for so long. Inside, the soft beep of the machines reminded them of the fragility of time. Their mother's life was slipping away, but in her final moments, she had given them a gift, the chance to find each other again. "I'll talk to her," Sarah said, her voice stronger now. "I'll tell her that we're going to be okay." Luke nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't ready to speak, not yet, but his silence wasn't the same as before. It wasn't cold, it wasn't distant. It was the quiet of a man on the verge of understanding, on the edge of release. As they walked back toward the house, side by side, Sarah felt something inside her loosen, a knot that had been tied so tightly for so long finally beginning to unravel. She glanced at Luke, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. The long road home had begun not with grand gestures or sweeping words, but with a simple choice, to try, to forgive, to let go. And so, dear listener, as we conclude this tale of letting go, I invite you to reflect on the burdens you might still carry. Just as Sarah and Luke found that forgiveness and release were not immediate, so too can your journey be one of patience and taking the first small step. Letting go is not about forgetting or dismissing the past, but about freeing yourself from the weight that holds you back. Each day offers a new chance to release what no longer serves you, to open your heart to healing and to embrace the peace that comes from forgiveness. Wherever you are in your journey, know that peace awaits those who are willing to take the first step. Sleep well, my friend.